democracy is under threat.
Democracy is in peril in every region of the world.
Desperation in the tens of thousands.
Global health emergency.
Death toll keeps climbing.
We don't have what we need.
Australia is on fire. Species will become extinct.
Irreversible legacy.
Shouting and chaos.
The identity gain nationality to pass on citizenship.
It's time for the world.
The human cost of this war.
To wake up.
This is real.
In our power, sea levels already altered with extinction.
8 years.
Stop this crisis.
During the 20th century, more than 100 million people died in wars. In World War I, 90% of the casualties were military personnel. But since the end of World War II, 90% of those killed in conflicts have been civilians. Many of them women and children. In Syria alone, more than 500,000 people have died so far, and millions more have been displaced.
خسرت من طريق هاي الحرب 5 أولاد خالتي وعيلتي، يعني أمي وأخواتي الله يرحمن، وخسرت عمي كمان. خسرنا كتير عالم يعني، والأهم من هيك إنه خسرنا بلدنا.
Recent decades have given rise to ethnic, sectarian, and religious conflicts that have resulted in senseless killings worldwide. From ethnic cleansing in Myanmar to the Saudi-led proxy war in Yemen.
In Yemen right now, you see pictures of children with just skin and bone, dying in their mothers' laps for nothing, a war that has no justification, that nobody wants, and for what reason, and nobody is trying to stop it.
In Central America, where gangs run rampant, gender-based violence is used as a means of intimidation and coercion. El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala report some of the highest rates of female homicide in the world. Across the global south, rebel and terrorist groups have killed hundreds of thousands and forced millions from their homes.
Rare footage of the group Boko Haram in northeast Nigeria.
Most of these Boko Haram conflicts target homes, where most times men work outside the homes and women are there to fend off the attacks, protect the children. One woman was fleeing from gunshots, and she finally got to an IDP camp and realized that the child had caught a bullet and died. She has not spoken since then.
Rape as a weapon of war. Chemical attacks on civilians. The ever-present possibility of a nuclear attack. These are the realities of our world today.
Women have had no role in planning or implementing these atrocities. The people who are making decisions are the men. So now is the time that we just have to say stop. These are our children, these are our family, these are our brothers, our husbands, our daughters. There are better ways. And we are the ones who need to step up and bring about change, because the world we see is unsustainable on many fronts.
We
are losing the Arctic as we know it because of climate change. This is a forewarning of all the hardship and problems that will spread around the planet.
Decades of fossil fuel use, greenhouse gas emissions, and aggressive deforestation are causing the temperature of the Earth to rise at an accelerated rate. And that is setting off a dire chain reaction across our entire ecosystem.
barwaaqo fara badan oo xooluhu dhaleen geeliyaariba adigu xoolihii oo markay fursad bateen waxa jirtay oo la tirin kari waayay wixii dabadeetana bariidba marba wuxuun baa soo dhimay.
Everywhere I went in Africa, I kept hearing things are so much worse now. And it was the impacts, and it was an eye-opener for me because I saw how severe it was in undermining food security. The burden on women to put food on the table. If the drought is very severe, they have to go further for the firewood, further for the water. So my understanding of climate began with a human rights lens and a gender lens, and then I read up on the science. And I said, oh my God, this is serious.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which includes scientists and experts from 195 countries, has presented data that shows that the average temperature of the Earth has risen 1.1 degrees Celsius since the 1950s. That might not seem like much, but consider this. Before the 20th century, it took more than 11,000 years for the Earth's average temperature to increase between 5 and 10 degrees. In just 70 years, the Earth's temperature has already increased 1.1 degrees. And that upward trend is predicted to continue. The IPCC is warning that we must work to limit that increase to 1.5 degrees to avoid catastrophic consequences.
The scientists said you have to reduce by 45% global carbon emissions by 2030, and this is doable if you have the political will, and you have 12 years. Now we're in year 11.
One of the most visible consequences of global warming is the fury of extreme weather across the planet. More violent storms causing massive destruction, devastating floods wiping out crops and livestock, severe droughts yielding fewer crops, out-of-control wildfires destroying homes and wildlife, and rising sea levels threatening coasts on every continent.
The Middle East is going to be highly affected by climate change. Lebanon, for example, used to be one of the richest countries in water. And now, with low precipitation, we actually suffer from water scarcity. And adding to this is the sea salt water intrusion. People now dig wells so that they can water their crops, and by doing so, you see sea salt coming from the sea replacing the excavation and the exploitation of these aquifers.
As these impacts intensify, scientists predict more people will face food insecurity. Availability of clean water will decrease. Severe flooding will encourage mosquito-borne diseases that will thrive and spread. And thousands of species will become extinct because of radical changes in their natural habitats.
We are destroying the systems that sustain us. We're crazy. We have to change.
And for those who rely on the land and natural resources for their livelihood, their very survival is at stake.
Climate justice is really the understanding that those that have contributed the most to the climate crisis that we're in right now are not going to be the most severely impacted. Those who have contributed the least, who are living fundamentally lifestyles of low consumption, of low emissions, are facing the brunt of climate impacts not tomorrow or in a few years, but they're facing them today.
Because our ocean is getting warmer, it affects the coral and where our fish live, which affects the livelihoods of our people that have to live off the ocean. you can clearly see over the past years the fish stock declining.
The World Bank estimates that the impacts of climate change in the global south could result in the migration of 140 million people before 2050, creating an even greater refugee crisis than we already have. For many, migration is a matter of life or death, and their options are becoming fewer and fewer.
De no moverse es más que nada enfocarse en la familia.
In the United States, we went from allowing about 100,000 refugees in 2016 to now capping the number at about 18,000 or so. This is a significant reduction, especially when you consider that the United States has a population of over 300 million. And what we really need is the global solution, because it really is a global problem.
The top 5 contributors to greenhouse gas emissions include China, the United States, India, Russia, and Japan.
The Paris Agreement making history at the UN, China, and the United States.
In 2015, 195 countries came together, including China and the US, and adopted the Paris Agreement.
To slow global warming.
It was an encouraging start to a global effort until the political winds changed.
The Trump administration is about to roll back policies on the environment.
After his election in 2016, President Donald Trump announced that the US would pull out of the Paris Agreement. Since then, his administration has overturned or weakened more than 80 environmental regulations put in place to mitigate climate change. President Xi of China recently announced plans to build more than 300 coal plants across Asia and the Middle East. And under Brazil's far-right president, Jair Bolsonaro, there has been an 80% increase in deforestation of the Amazon rainforest. Bolsonaro was backed by a powerful agricultural lobby that has been pushing for more development in the forest, completely disregarding indigenous people who have been caretakers of the forest for hundreds of years.
These are people who have learned to be good stewards of that environment without a total environmental collapse. The problem is that in the business world and governments as well, a short-term gain is more important than a long-term gain. And that's a very dangerous concept.
The climate crisis is a feedback of the current injustice and inequality that exists in our world. It's the clarion call of the earth saying this is what happens when you have a system that's based on extracting resources from one community to the other. When it comes to prioritizing profit over people, it's the same forces that oppress people based on race, based on class, based on gender, that also wield this control over nature that has a disrespect for how it impacts us globally.
Every family in this world is now connected one to the other in the same ecology. We actually rely on other human beings to help us with our ecology. So what they're doing in the Brazilian forest is impacting everyone, is impacting me, and how climate change is going to affect me and my security. There's no such thing as personal security, divorced from or different from global security. That is the reality of our security now.
I remember once meeting a woman on a train. She was telling this very sad and painful story about an uncle she adored who admired her. He was working on a family tree, and she waited and waited and waited for her copy. Didn't get one. Was talking to her brother and said, "Oh, I got it ages ago." And she insisted on seeing it. And that's when she realized that her beloved uncle's concept of family was only the men. None of the women were there. So what do you do with that? She did not know how profoundly she wasn't family until she saw that family tree.
Throughout history, women have been subjugated in a system, in a structure of relationships that begins in the family and goes all the way to community, to the political system, to culture, to religion, to the economy. Everything supports the patriarchal system globally. And it's not easy to change.
Dans notre religion, la femme, elle respecte les paroles de son mari. C'est son mari qui est son chef. C'est lui qui dit fais et évite.
Because we are dealing with people who are socialized to think like that, we see this tradition being carried forward by men especially, but even women who have been socialized to believe that they are less than men.
All religions have played a role in defining the subordinate status of women in society. Whether it's trying to control women's bodies or denying them their autonomy. In many countries, religious-based family laws determine many aspects of women's lives, including rights to marriage, divorce, child custody, inheritance, and education, and the ability to own land, among others. And in 25 countries, women don't even have the right to pass on their own nationality to their children or foreign spouse.
ما راح حدا يعطيهم أولادهم، ما راح حدا يزوجهم، لأنه معانا راح يصير. شغل زي الناس مش صح لهم يشتغلوا، وممنوع يطلعوا من البلد. مصير أولادي للضيعة إذا ما بتنحل مشكلتهم.
Without citizenship, children have obstacles with accessing education, healthcare, formal employment, even inheriting the family home or owning property in the country of their birth, simply because the nationality law of that country does not treat their mother as an equal citizen. They can't access even a cell phone in some instances. When you think of all of the things that require an identity card in this day of age, imagine trying to go through life without that.
With the current rise of autocratic leaders worldwide, many of them are aligning themselves with far-right conservative forces. For the leaders, it bolsters their power. For conservatives, it gives them a way forward to turn back the clock and reverse the gains women have achieved.
Despite the fact that we are a secular country, what we see more and more, it's fundamentalist religious groups occupying formal political spaces. And this is something that's very dangerous and that has a direct impact in women's human rights and reproductive rights.
Gender equality is not only important because it is a human rights for women and for everybody, but it is also essential when it comes to building peace and protecting human security for themselves and for their children.
The one thing that is present everywhere in our world is gender-based violence, and it comes in many different forms. It comes on the attack of women's bodies. It comes in diminishing women's abilities so that women do not feel that they can contribute to the well-being of society.
But women worldwide are speaking out and fighting back.
Women have united to claim that time is up.
Today, gender-based violence against women is discussed in Parliament, in the United Nations, in businesses. It is discussed in religious institutions. So it is now a common knowledge that violence against women does not happen to just women who are underprivileged, but even women who are privileged. It's not enough to tell the story. What must follow is how we are able to use this knowledge to really bring change for women and not to go backwards again.
Income inequality has become one of the biggest threats to the global economy and a flashpoint for growing insecurity and unrest. In India, 10% of the population owns 73% of the wealth. In the Middle East, 10% of the population control about 65% of the wealth, while 60% of the population is classified as poor or vulnerable. In the US, the top 10% controls 70% of the wealth. Over the last 40 years, the average CEO in the United States saw a pay increase of 940%. The average worker received an increase of 12% over the same 40-year period.
We're seeing what is, in fact, a global phenomenon, and it is the rise of what I call Wild West capitalism. It is a determined effort by capitalists to ensure that the state serves the profit-making agenda of corporations as they make more and more money and share less of it with workers.
Each year, the World Economic Forum measures the relative gaps between women and men on health, education, economic participation, and political participation in 153 countries. The countries with the closest parity include Iceland, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. The worst? Yemen, Pakistan, Iraq, and Syria. The United States ranked 53. The largest gaps continue to be in economic and political participation. Everywhere, women earn less than their male counterparts, have less chance of advancing to more senior roles, particularly women of color. And they do the majority of unpaid care work. In political participation, women only hold between 20 and 30% of parliamentary and ministerial positions. In Sweden, social protection systems enacted decades ago include parental leave, affordable childcare, and a more equitable tax policy for married couples. And this has had a significant impact.
Women entering our labor force have helped our economy. Sweden has, and in comparison to other countries, a very strong economy. So even if the reforms cost money, we also get people out into the labor force and with the possibility of both having a career and a family. Our nativity rates are higher than in many other countries, and the percentage of women participating in the labor force also is higher. So if you look at the numbers and at our economy, it's a win-win-win.
I declare the NGO Forum on Women, based in 1995,
In 1995, when the Beijing conference took place, if you looked at technology at that point, and you look at technology today, and you see the enormous change in the landscape that has taken place. There was no long slog for technology. It was a giant leap. Why is it such a long slog for equality, for gender equality? That's the question to ask, and that's the point for this moment in time.
As women, we have organized, we have mobilized, we have brought consciousness, but none of our goals, none of our aspirations are fully capable of being implemented unless we can change the system. We know that the patriarchal structures are not working. The way that leadership has been exercised, that power is only reached by being taken away from others. Power that we want as women is power to work with. Power that comes from community, from dialogue, from sharing.
We need to educate each and every woman to make them aware about their power as voters and as activists. And we have to present a different model of politics, which is more ethical and more committed to the real needs of the majority of the population, especially women and children.
To create holistic change, we also have to work together. So even if we're all working on issues separately, we need to come to a common understanding of the bigger picture.
We have to work with men, with progressive groups, and we have to reach a unified collective vision that we can also implement at every setting in the way that is suitable for them.
You see the difficulties women face. And there's a commonality in that suffering, and there's a commonality in the challenges. And we can choose to stay silent, or we can choose to do something about it. Because if we don't, who will?
We have to start with each of us. Each individual has to begin to rethink the world we seek and how are we going to get to it.
We have to start talking with young people at younger and younger ages, in civics classes and in the home, in churches and community organizations, about what is in the public interest, what is in the public good.
That can be very helpful in the campaigning.
The value of intergenerational communication is we can learn from what previous generations did, that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can adapt techniques and bring to it the new technologies that we have at our fingertips.
We deserve a safe future.
Get angry with those with more responsibility that aren't doing enough. And that's governments across the board, fossil fuel industry, agribusiness. They all should be doing much more.
The story of change begins at the grassroots level, because that's where the things happen. Any powerless people, once they understand what it could be for them to get their freedom, they don't go back.
I think we need to understand that this moment we are living in is kind of the last gasp of patriarchy and racism. As difficult as it is to think that we are winning at this moment, I think we are.
There is nothing that we can't do as women if we mobilize together and use the power of our numbers.
The feminist movement is the longest, broadest movement for equality and justice that the world has ever seen. And it's the feminist movement that will lead us there.